All right, good morning, you guys. So this morning we're going to be talking about radicals, and this will prepare you for Algebra 1. I know you've probably heard or seen this before, but I really want you to understand this concept, and we're going to make it real easy, okay? So let's just go over the definition of a radical. A radical is an expression that uses a root, such as a square root or cube root. So you probably have seen this symbol before. This is called a radical. All right, so it looks like a division sign, but it's not exactly, okay? It looks a little different. Okay, so basically a root is when you multiply a number by itself a given number of times. So that sounds kind of like blah, 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 but I'm going to give you some examples. So if you take a number and you multiply it by itself, if you multiply that number by itself, that's called a perfect square. We're going to also call it a hidden square, okay? And I'll explain that in a second. So remember, a perfect square. So let's kind of think about that for a second. So if we take a number and we multiply by itself, so let's start with some really easy perfect squares. So let's say we have 1 times 1. We get 1, right? Okay, so the next, let's go to 2. So first we're going to start with our 1, then we're going to go to 2. So we're going to take 2 times 2, and we know that equals 4. All right, then 3 times 3 equals 9. All right, and then 4 times 4, 16. Okay, these are all the ones that you should know. 5 times 5, 25, right? Then we have 6 times 6. We know that equals 36. Okay, 7 times 7, 49. 8 times 8, 64. 9 times 9, 81. Right? 10 times 10 equals 100. We'll go to 11. 11 times 11, 121. 12 times 12, 144. Then 13 times 13 equals 169. These are really important because these are the first 13 perfect squares. Meaning they're called perfect squares because when you multiply those numbers by themselves, you're going to get, you can take the same number and you can multiply it by itself, and you're going to get these answers here. These are very, very important. So let's make sure that you memorize these. Okay, so you're going to definitely memorize these. And so let's kind of think about that for a second. So we're going to keep that that in front of us. But let's think about, like, let's say we look at the square root of 9. Okay, that's very simple. So just to kind of give you a little bit of vocabulary, this symbol right here is called a radical. Okay, this symbol right here, that's called a radical. Okay, this inside here is called the radicand. I'm giving you these terms because in algebra sometimes they'll ask you these terms, and I want you to know what they mean. So when we see a radical, also called a square root, the reason why we're calling this a square root is because we're taking this number and we're asking, well, what times what equals this number? So you know that this is a perfect square because 3 times 3 equals 9. So because you have two of the same numbers, we know that the square root of 9 is 3. Because when you have 9, you multiply it by 3 times 3, and then you get 3. Let's try another one. The square root of 25. Well, we know that this is also a perfect square because we can go under the radical, we could put, well, 5 times 5. We know that that's two of the same numbers, so the square root of 25 equals 5. Okay? That's our answer. That's why we're calling these square roots. But let's say I'm going to take this a little bit higher. Let's say we took the square root of 8. And I said out here, well, I want the cubed root. See out here we have a 3. This means you're going to ask yourself, well, what number can be multiplied 3 times by itself to give you 8? Well, if you think about that for a second, we could say, 2 times 2 is 4, right? 2 times 2 times 2, that's a cube root. That equals 8. So the cubed root of 8 equals 2. But if you don't see any number outside of our radical, if we don't see any number, then we know it's just a square root, meaning you're going to just take a number by itself. So you're not going to put a 2 out here. This symbol right here just means the square root. So let's think about that. What times what equals 64? Well, we know we could say, well, 8 times 8, that's a perfect square. We know that when we multiply 8 times itself, we get 64. So the square root of 64 is 8. I hope that helps. I'm going to come on with a different video in just a second explaining the next concept.